All right, going from cognitive maps to cognitive learning processes, which gives us things like our cognitive maps. Again, remember what Mr. Woodard said. Everything that we're learning is the stuff that Skinner would have a tough time arguing against. This is all cognitive. Skinner was completely behavioral. So, two terms to know on this slide: latent learning and insight learning. So latent learning is learning you didn't even know that you had until all of a sudden you had to do it. So let's say you came back to school and somebody said, hey, can you run down to the library real quick and grab a book? Well, you probably wouldn't even think about it if you've gone to LC before. You could go right down to the library, no problem at all. However, you come back and all of a sudden we have all these one-way hallways, certain stairwells, you can only go up, not down. Now you've got to apply insight learning. Now you've got to reorganize your perception of the school and figure out how to get down to the library by following the correct paths that are laid out within the school, which aren't normal for us. Okay? So latent learning, you didn't even know you had it. Go back to the cognitive map getting up to Ferris. 37th is closed. You could easily get to Ferris without probably even really thinking about it. You just drop back down to 29th, go over to Regal, whatever it is. You would be able to do that without really thinking about it. Why? Because you have that latent learning. It's already in there. All right, so latent learning, insight learning. I think in your book, the insight learning example is the chimpanzee or some sort of a monkey, and they've got bananas just out of reach, but then there's a stick in the corner, and the little monkey figures out how to use the stick as a tool. That's insight learning. All right, motivation. Why do we do certain things? Take this off, by the way. First is intrinsic motivation. Some people like to do certain activities simply because they like the activity. Again, easy example, grades in school. Some people just like school. They like getting good grades. They like learning. Okay, so that's an intrinsic motivator. You could argue that grades are an extrinsic motivator, but some people, they just really enjoy the ambiance of school and they really enjoy learning. Versus extrinsic motivation, when you get a reward for doing some sort of behavior. So if your parents pay you for your grades, that would be an external motivator. Again, the grade itself could be an external motivator as well, an extrinsic motivator, something outside of you. You're doing it for that reward rather than just for the pleasure of the activity itself. Okay? Intrinsic versus extrinsic. So think of an activity you enjoy. Let's just say you really love to go jogging. You are intrinsically motivated to go jogging. You just love to jog. Okay? Now, imagine I gave you $15 an hour to go jogging. That'd be awesome, wouldn't it? Just great, okay. But then after a while, I stopped giving you $15 an hour. What would the result be as far as your enjoyment of that activity? Would you enjoy doing the activity less? Would you enjoy it about the same? Would you enjoy doing the activity even more now that you've made some money doing it? Well, the answer lies in the term over-justification. What they found is if you start to give extrinsic rewards to somebody for a behavior that they intrinsically love to do in the first place, but then you started to give them extrinsic rewards, you'll actually reduce that internal motivation, that intrinsic motivation. So like the example there, child get money for playing video games. After a while, especially if you pull that money away, kid doesn't really care about video games as much. Or you might not like jogging as much anymore because that extrinsic motivator has impeded on your own intrinsic motivation. So it's over justification. Rather than just going jogging for the love of jogging, you've been over justified by getting money for it, and that has triggered something in your brain and in your motivation, because now all of a sudden the motivator has become extrinsic. And extrinsic motivators are not nearly as strong as intrinsic motivators. Okay. Next term is learned helplessness. This is a great little video that we'll watch in class. It's only like 30 seconds long, and it's hilarious. In less hilarious situations, I think the book mentions learned helplessness in the context of nursing homes. Oftentimes in nursing homes with elderly patients in nursing homes, the staff at the nursing home does everything for them, and after a while, the patient themselves feels like they can't do anything. They really and truly believe that they can't do anything. So that's why a lot of facilities like that really, really stress having the patients do what they can. Something as simple to us as like tying a shoe. They really want those patients not to fall into that learned helplessness. And let's face it, some bad nursing facilities, they don't care. They'll just do everything for them, and that's that. Parents, this can happen with parents as well. I've known parents that have done this actually, that they'll do everything for their young child, and at no point as soon as the child says, I can't do this, the parents say, oh, okay, I got it. Well, that child's not going to develop as quickly if they're not challenged at certain times. It's not a mean thing. It's a just challenge. Yeah, you can tie your shoe. You did that last week. We've worked on it. You go ahead and tie that shoe now, okay? And then the child rises to the occasion. And then we're going to learn in the personality unit too that or the development unit, that some kids have a temperament that they're independent. They're going to do it themselves anyway. So learned helplessness doesn't even really become a factor. But oftentimes, if a parent does absolutely everything for a child, they'll kind of get that learned helplessness. I can't do it. And then the parent rushes to their aid at the detriment of the development of the child. Oops, wrong way. Internal versus external locus of control. So I talked about intrinsic motivation, so being intrinsically motivated to do something. I want to do it because I love doing it. Locus of control is how somebody perceives their control within the world. Is the world controlling so much that I really feel like I don't have much control, or do I have a real strong internal locus of control? I control quite a bit. Now, obviously, life happens. Things do happen externally, but people will lean towards feeling internal versus an external locus of a control the majority of the time. So self-control comes from an internal locus of control. And we'll watch the famous marshmallow experiment, I believe is this video. And that is when you have that control within yourself. So like going back to the Premack principle. Mr. Woodard said, study for an hour and then you get your bowl of ice cream. Well, if you don't have a real great internal locus of control, you might only study for 20 minutes and go, I'm going to get an ice cream. Okay, that self-control is part of that internal locus of control. Example I always use with locus of control is a test. You fail a test. I think we've used this example before. You fail a test. If you are somebody that has a real strong internal locus of control, you'll accept responsibility for that. You'll say, hey, I studied for 20 minutes last night. I didn't really pay much of attention. I thought I could do well on this test and I didn't. That's my bad. If you have a real strong external locus of control, you probably will start looking at reasons outside of yourself for that bad test grade. Mr. Davis didn't create a very good test. We weren't taught all this material. We didn't have enough time to study before the test. You start looking outside. Now, that's not to say that sometimes that's not true. Sometimes the test is bad. Sometimes, sometimes there are questions on a test and we hadn't shown them to you before. That's true. But again, with internal and external locus of control, it's where somebody tends to go early when they are faced with some sort of a challenge. Do they blame them? Do they take responsibility, or do they go and try to blame other folks? And the same thing is with successes too. Somebody has a real strong internal locus of control that scored well on a test. They're going to say, hey, yeah, I studied my tail off. I really worked hard on that. Okay. Observational learning, Bandura. We will watch a couple of videos on Bandura. Observational learning is pretty simple. New responses, new behaviors are acquired just simply after watching other people. Early on in the pandemic with the mask thing, I think I told this story. I went into a Costco, everybody wearing masks. They were one of the first stores to require masks. You knew when you walked in what the behavioral expectation was. I walked into a hardware store later that day, nobody. Every single person in that store not wearing masks. I knew what the behavioral expectation. Doesn't mean I didn't wear a mask. However, it's hard to go against the grain, right? If there are a lot of people doing one thing, then it's very easy to follow along. And that can be pro-social or anti-social. It can be something that's really good for the community. It can be something not so good for the community. The anti-social you'll see with the Bandura video. Coming back to school, you don't know which way is which. You start watching people. You start watching the administrators saying, okay, this hallway goes this way, that stairwell goes up. So we observe and learn from those observations. Long-term potentiation, we talked about this in Chapter 3. Mr. Woodard mentioned it on a video. If you are listening to this video and you are learning, you are actually changing the synapses in your brain. That's called long-term potentiation. It helps with learning. And then finally, mirror neurons. There's a great video that we'll probably show you. There was this monkey, and it had an electrode on its brain, and it was measuring some neural activity, and when it reached for a peanut, it would fire. Well, this experimenter came in one day, and the experimenter reached for the peanut, and all of a sudden, the machine started clicking. And they realized that the monkey had these, what are called mirror neurons, that actually started to fire as if the monkey itself was reaching for the peanut. This helps us with observational learning. We actually have neurons that will watch other people, and they'll fire as if we are doing the activity that we are watching. So again, Skinner thought all learning was behavioral. All of the things that we've been talking about here on the last couple of videos are all cognitive. We do learn things through cognition, not just from behavior and rewards and punishment. Okay, 11 minutes and 30 seconds, done with Chapter 6.